People like her always think silence makes them innocent. Sergeant Lucas Barrett's voice carried across the courtroom as he placed a sealed evidence bag on the table, and inside it rested a black handgun he claimed had been found in Danielle Carter's trunk. Every face turned toward her. Reporters stopped typing. The prosecutor folded his arms with the quiet confidence of a man who believed the case had already ended. Danielle sat alone beside her court-appointed attorney, her navy blouse wrinkled from a night in county holding, a faint red line circling one wrist where the handcuffs had pressed too tightly. She did not look at the gun. She looked at Barrett. "No, Sergeant," she said calmly. "Silence makes people careless." His smile weakened, but only for a second. What Barrett did not know was that Danielle had been waiting 3 weeks for him to bring that weapon into this courtroom. He thought she was another frightened black woman with no money, no influence, and no one powerful enough to question his badge. He had no idea why she had driven down Jefferson Avenue at 11:42 that night, why she had refused every plea deal offered to her, or why a sealed envelope had been sitting inside Judge Margaret Hale's private safe since before Danielle's arrest. Subscribe and stay with this story, because the evidence Barrett believed would destroy her was about to reveal who had truly been under investigation. The courtroom smelled of old paper, polished wood, and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Pale morning light fell through the high windows, cutting across the witness stand and catching the silver edge of Barrett's badge. He wore his dress uniform perfectly, every crease sharp, every button bright. For 12 years, local news stations had called him the officer who cleaned up the city's most dangerous streets. His photograph hung inside police headquarters beside plaques, medals, and smiling officials. In neighborhoods like Danielle's, however, people spoke his name differently. Quietly. Carefully. Like a warning. Judge Hale adjusted her glasses and studied the evidence bag. "Sergeant Barrett, you testified that this firearm was discovered during a lawful vehicle search." "Yes, Your Honor," he answered. "Along with narcotics and marked cash." "And the defendant resisted your instructions?" Barrett glanced at Danielle before replying. "She was uncooperative from the moment we stopped her." Danielle's attorney, Rachel Kim, shifted beside her. She had warned Danielle that the jury would trust a decorated officer. She had explained that refusing the prosecutor's offer could mean years in federal prison. Danielle had listened without interrupting, then asked only one question: did they check the serial number? Now Rachel understood why. The prosecutor approached the bench and requested that the weapon be admitted into evidence. Barrett relaxed, his shoulders settling beneath the dark blue fabric. Across the aisle, Officer Evan Doyle sat behind the prosecution table, staring down at his hands. He had been present during the arrest, but unlike Barrett, he had not looked at Danielle once since entering the room. Judge Hale lifted her pen. "Any objection?" Rachel started to rise, but Danielle touched her sleeve. The gesture was small, almost invisible. Then Danielle stood. The wooden chair slid softly behind her, its legs whispering against the floor. "Your Honor," she said, "before you admit that weapon, please open the envelope delivered to your chambers 21 days ago." Barrett's head turned sharply. The prosecutor blinked. Even Officer Doyle finally looked up. Judge Hale's expression changed as she glanced toward the locked cabinet beside her clerk. For the first time that morning, Barrett's confidence did not return. Danielle remained standing beneath the cold courtroom light, her breathing slow, her hands steady. She had entered this room accused of carrying a stolen gun. In less than 1 minute, everyone would learn why the FBI had registered that same gun in her name before Barrett ever claimed to find it. 3 weeks earlier, Danielle Carter had returned to Bellwether with one suitcase, a folder of unanswered questions, and the watch her younger brother Marcus had worn every day since high school. The city looked unchanged from the passenger window of her rental car. Brick storefronts lined Jefferson Avenue. Church signs leaned toward the street. Summer heat shimmered above the pavement even after sunset. Yet every familiar corner felt altered by the fact that Marcus was no longer there to point out what had changed. The official report said he had died from an overdose several hours after being released from police custody. It described him as confused, unstable, and uncooperative. Danielle read those words 6 times at her mother's kitchen table while an old ceiling fan clicked overhead. None of them sounded like Marcus. He had worked mornings at a hardware store, coached youth basketball on Saturdays, and called their mother every night at 9. More important, the medical examiner's timeline did not match the police report. Marcus had been documented leaving the station at 7:18 in the evening, but a city traffic camera showed Sergeant Lucas Barrett's patrol vehicle entering a restricted garage with Marcus still inside at 7:43. 25 minutes had vanished from the record. Danielle knew how much damage could hide inside 25 missing minutes. For 11 years, she had worked as a forensic auditor, tracing money through shell companies, false invoices, and accounts designed to look ordinary. Numbers did not become nervous when questioned. Dates did not protect one another. Records either aligned or they exposed the lie. She began with Barrett's arrest history. 6 black residents had been stopped by his unit within 18 months. Each case involved a weapon, narcotics, or marked cash found after a body camera interruption. Each suspect had been described as uncooperative. 5 had accepted plea deals. 1 was still awaiting trial. Danielle printed every report and spread the pages across Marcus's old bedroom floor. The air smelled faintly of cedar and laundry detergent. His basketball trophy stood on the dresser beneath a thin coat of dust. She circled the same phrases until the red ink looked like a wound running through every file. On the 3rd night, her mother, Miriam, appeared in the doorway wearing a faded robe. "You should sleep," she said. Danielle looked at Marcus's watch in her palm. The second hand had stopped at 8:12. Did he ever mention Barrett? Miriam's face tightened. Once. He said that officer looked at him like the decision had already been made. The next morning, Danielle drove 40 miles to the nearest Federal Bureau of Investigation field office. She did not bring accusations. She brought timelines, access logs, patrol routes, property records, and a chart connecting Barrett's unit to missing evidence from the police storage facility. Special Agent Aaron Blake studied the documents without speaking. His office was cold enough to raise small bumps along Danielle's arms. After nearly 20 minutes, he closed the folder. "We have heard rumors," he said. "Rumors do not survive in court. Then stop treating them like rumors." Blake leaned back. "What are you asking us to do?" Danielle placed Marcus's watch on the desk between them. "Give Barrett someone he believes no one will protect." Blake's eyes moved from the watch to her face. "You understand what that would require?" "Yes." "You could be detained. Charged. Publicly accused." Danielle thought of the 6 reports on Marcus's floor, all written in the same polished language. That is why he will believe it. Blake warned her that once the operation began, the Federal Bureau of Investigation might not be able to intervene immediately. Danielle nodded. She had not come for immediate rescue. She had come to create a record Barrett could not rewrite. Before she left, Blake asked why she was willing to risk her freedom for people she had never met. Danielle picked up Marcus's silent watch. "Because someone believed my brother was alone." By the time Danielle left the federal building, Lucas Barrett was standing beneath bright television lights on the steps of Bellwether City Hall, smiling as the mayor praised him for making the city safer. His uniform looked untouched by the afternoon heat. The gold trim on his badge caught the cameras each time he turned. Behind him, a row of officers stood shoulder to shoulder while reporters repeated the same words that had followed Barrett for years: decorated, disciplined, dependable. He had become more than a police sergeant. He was a public symbol. The men local stations called whenever officials needed someone to speak about order. He visited schools, shook hands at charity breakfasts, and posed beside boxes of donated groceries during the holidays. Judge Margaret Hale had personally commended his unit twice from the bench. City council members quoted his arrest statistics during election season. To most of Bellwether, Barrett represented safety. Along Jefferson Avenue, his name carried another meaning. Store owners lowered their voices when patrol cars passed. Mothers taught their sons to keep both hands visible and answer every question with "sir." Drivers checked their mirrors twice near the abandoned paper mill because Barrett's unit often waited there after dark. The stories were always similar. A routine stop. A search no one understood. Evidence appearing where nothing had been moments earlier. Then came the report, written in clean official language that made fear sound like guilt. Barrett knew how to use that language. He never needed to raise his voice when a calm sentence could close a case. His authority lived in forms, signatures, and the assumption that a badge spoke more honestly than the person standing before it. Inside the police department, younger officers studied him carefully. Some admired him. Others simply learned not to question him. Officer Evan Doyle had joined Barrett's unit 8 months earlier, fresh from academy training and still careful enough to read every policy before signing his name. He noticed that Barrett chose certain neighborhoods, certain cars, and certain drivers. He noticed evidence bags arriving without property photographs. He noticed body cameras failing at convenient moments, then working perfectly for the rest of the shift. The first time Doyle asked about it, Barrett closed the office door and placed a thick hand on a stack of reports between them. "The street is not a classroom," he said. "Out there, hesitation gets people hurt." Doyle never asked again, but he began keeping copies. Barrett mistook silence for loyalty. That mistake had protected him for years. At the same time, Agent Aaron Blake's team was building a map of Barrett's power. It extended beyond patrol routes. A clerk in the evidence room altered timestamps. A prosecutor accepted incomplete reports. A confidential informant appeared in 5 unrelated cases under 3 different names. None of it was enough alone. Together, it formed a pattern. Blake explained the risk to Danielle in a secure conference room 2 days after their first meeting. "Barrett does not act unless he believes the target is isolated," he said. "He checks employment, family, criminal history, and whether anyone important will ask questions." Danielle looked through the glass wall at agents moving quietly between desks. "Then give him exactly what he expects." Her cover would be simple. A recently returned woman with financial problems, an old sedan, and a brother whose record could be used against her. The Federal Bureau of Investigation would create a false trail suggesting she carried cash for a local dealer. Barrett would see it through one of the department contacts already under surveillance. Blake warned her again that a plan could not control every decision Barrett made. Danielle fastened Marcus's watch around her wrist, though its hands no longer moved. "Neither could Marcus," she said. 48 hours later, Barrett received Danielle Carter's name in a confidential message. He studied her photograph, her address, and the route she drove each evening. Then he leaned back in his chair and smiled. To him, she looked alone. Danielle drove the route exactly as Aaron Blake had instructed, keeping both hands visible on the steering wheel while Jefferson Avenue narrowed into a strip of warehouses and dim storefronts. It was 11:42 at night. The air outside still held the day's heat, and the old sedan's air conditioner pushed out a weak stream that smelled faintly of dust. Marcus's stopwatch rested against her wrist. In the rearview mirror, headlights appeared 2 blocks behind her, steady and patient. Danielle did not turn her head. She already knew who was there. The patrol car followed through one green light, then another. When the red and blue lights finally flashed, they filled the sedan with cold color. Danielle pulled into an empty gas station beneath a buzzing white canopy. She placed the car in park, lowered the window, and waited. Sergeant Lucas Barrett approached from the driver's side. Officer Evan Doyle moved toward the passenger door. Barrett's face carried the calm expression people trusted on television, but his eyes traveled through the car before they settled on Danielle. "License and registration." She handed them over slowly. "Do you know why I stopped you?" "No, Sergeant." He noticed that she had read his nameplate. Something sharpened behind his smile. "You crossed the center line." Danielle had not. The federal team had mapped every foot of the route, and a hidden sensor beneath the dashboard had recorded the position of the tires. She kept her voice even. "I do not believe I did." Barrett leaned closer to the window. "Step out of the vehicle." Doyle looked at him. "We have not run the plate yet." Barrett did not turn. "Step out, Miss Carter." Hearing her name before he checked her identification confirmed what Blake suspected. Danielle opened the door and stood beneath the gas station lights. Heat rose from the concrete through the soles of her shoes. Across the road, a freight train rolled slowly behind the warehouses, its low metallic rhythm stretching through the darkness. Barrett asked where she had been. Danielle gave the cover story exactly as prepared. She had finished a bookkeeping job. She was going home. She did not consent to a search. Barrett nodded as though she had said the words he wanted. "Officer Doyle, check the vehicle." Doyle hesitated. She did not consent. Probable cause, Barrett replied. I smell marijuana. There was no marijuana in the car. Doyle knew it. Danielle could see the knowledge pass across his face before he looked away. He opened the passenger door and searched the front seat, the glove compartment, and the floorboards. He moved to the trunk and lifted it. Nothing, he said after several seconds. Barrett stood beside Danielle, close enough for his polished badge to reflect the white lights above them. Look again. Doyle checked beneath the spare tire cover. Still nothing. Barrett's jaw tightened. Then he pointed toward the patrol car. Go confirm the registration. Doyle remained still. I can do it from here. That was not a request. Doyle walked away, each step slower than the one before it. Barrett watched until he reached the patrol car. Then he opened the rear door of Danielle's sedan and leaned inside. The movement lasted only a few seconds. When he returned, his hands were empty. Danielle said nothing. She listened for the soft vibration Blake had told her would confirm that the hidden camera was transmitting. Nothing came. Barrett stepped toward the trunk. A moment later, he raised a sealed bag containing a handgun. Well, he said quietly, look what we found. Danielle's heartbeat struck once, hard and deep. The transmitter had failed. There would be no immediate signal, no agents arriving from the darkness, no voice in her earpiece telling her the operation had succeeded. Doyle returned and stopped when he saw the weapon. His face lost its color. That was not there. Barrett looked at him. The silence between the two officers felt heavier than the night air. Then Barrett turned to Danielle and reached for his handcuffs. You are under arrest. Danielle held her hands behind her back without protest. Cold metal closed around her wrists as the freight train disappeared beyond the warehouses. Barrett believed he had found a woman no one would protect. Danielle understood something more frightening. For the plan to work now, she would have to let him keep believing it. The county holding room had no windows, only a fluorescent light that hummed above a row of bolted metal benches. Danielle sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, though the marks around her wrists had begun to darken. Across the room, a wall clock moved 1 minute at a time with a dry mechanical click. No one told her whether the Federal Bureau of Investigation had received the failed signal. No one mentioned Aaron Blake. No one came through the door. Barrett entered after midnight carrying a paper cup of coffee and a folder with Danielle's name printed across the front. He sat opposite her, opened the file, and let the silence stretch. You made this harder than it needed to be, he said. Danielle looked at the untouched coffee. Did I? We found a stolen firearm, narcotics, and marked cash in your vehicle. You found all of that after Officer Doyle said the car was empty. Barrett's eyes narrowed. That is not what his report will say. He slid a document across the table. It was a statement already prepared for her signature. The language was simple. Danielle had known the weapon was present. She had transported the money. She had acted alone. If she signed, Barrett explained, the prosecutor might recommend leniency. Danielle read every line, then pushed the paper back. No, Barrett leaned into the chair as if disappointed rather than surprised. Your brother had trouble making good decisions too. The words were chosen carefully. Danielle felt Marcus's stopped watch against her wrist beneath the cuff of her blouse. You read his file. I know the people who pass through my district. People like us. Barrett gave a small smile. People who believe rules are optional until consequences arrive. Danielle kept her breathing slow. The hidden operation had depended on Barrett showing his methods, but this room had no federal camera, no witness, and no guarantee that anyone outside knew where she was. He wanted anger. He wanted fear. Either could become a sentence in his report. She gave him neither. I want an attorney. Barrett closed the folder. You already had a chance to help yourself. I am helping myself. Hours later, Rachel Kim arrived carrying a legal pad and the exhausted expression of someone called away from sleep. She was a public defender with sharp eyes, a practical voice, and too many cases waiting on her desk. In a small interview room, she explained the charges and the weight of the evidence. The firearm had been listed as stolen. The money matched bills from an undercover operation. The drugs were packaged for distribution. The prosecutor is offering 8 years if you plead now, Rachel said. That can become 20 if this goes to trial. Danielle asked, was the search recorded? Rachel checked her notes. The body camera cuts out for 93 seconds. What explanation did Barrett give? Equipment failure. Danielle looked through the narrow glass panel in the door. An officer passed without slowing. Check the evidence room access logs. Rachel paused. Why? Check the serial number on the gun. Check who signed it out, when the property seal was broken, and whether Barrett had access. Miss Carter, I need to understand what you know. Danielle could not reveal the operation unless Blake had confirmed the evidence survived. If she exposed herself too soon, Barrett could claim entrapment, destroy records, or warn everyone connected to him. I know the evidence is false. Rachel lowered her voice. That is not enough. Then ask Officer Doyle what he saw before Barrett sent him away. For the first time, Rachel stopped writing. Did Doyle say something? Not yet. By sunrise, Danielle had been moved to a cell where another woman sat on the lower bunk, staring at the floor. She introduced herself as Tasha Reed. Barrett's unit had stopped her 2 months earlier. Drugs had appeared beneath her passenger seat after a search. She had accepted a plea because she could not risk losing custody of her daughter. I did everything they told me, Tasha whispered. The sentence pressed into Danielle more deeply than Barrett's threats. Marcus had said the same thing during his final call home. Danielle closed her eyes as pale morning light slipped beneath the door. Somewhere beyond those walls, Barrett was writing another perfect report. Somewhere, Aaron Blake was either gathering the truth or realizing the operation had vanished. When a guard arrived with a second plea agreement, Danielle did not touch it. Tell the prosecutor I want a hearing, she said. The guard shook his head. You are making a mistake. Danielle looked at the stopped hands of Marcus's watch. No, she replied. I am making a record. The first full day in county holding moved without sunlight. Danielle measured time by the meal cart, the changing footsteps in the corridor, and the soft scrape of Tasha Reed turning on the lower bunk. The fluorescent light never dimmed. It poured the same pale color over the concrete walls until morning and night felt like the same locked room. Tasha spoke only when the silence became too heavy. She told Danielle about her daughter, Ava, who was 7 and believed her mother was away for work. She described the traffic stop in pieces, each detail delivered carefully, as if saying too much might bring Barrett back through the door. She had been driving home from a late shift at a nursing facility. Barrett said her taillight was broken. Officer Doyle had not been there that night. Another officer searched the car and found nothing. Then Barrett checked the passenger side himself. Minutes later, a small bag appeared beneath the seat. I told them it was not mine, Tasha said. They wrote that I was nervous. Danielle looked down at Marcus's watch. Were you nervous? Of course I was. Tasha gave a tired laugh without humor. That was the proof, according to them. Danielle understood the design more clearly now. Barrett did not only plant evidence. He turned ordinary fear into confirmation. A trembling hand became guilt. A question became resistance. Silence became deception. Whatever the target did, his report translated it into a crime. Near noon, Rachel Kim returned with a copy of the evidence inventory. She sat across from Danielle in the interview room and placed the papers on the table one sheet at a time. You were right about the firearm, she said. It entered police storage 8 months ago after a burglary investigation. The original case was closed. Who accessed it last? The digital log shows no one. Danielle studied her face. That means someone bypassed the system or changed the record. It means I requested the handwritten backup. Rachel lowered her voice. The clerk suddenly could not find it. A small current moved through Danielle's chest. Not hope. Confirmation. Barrett was already cleaning the trail. And Officer Doyle? He signed the arrest report, but he has not answered my calls. Rachel hesitated before continuing. The prosecutor wants the hearing moved up. Tomorrow morning. Barrett requested that. Most likely. Danielle turned toward the narrow window. Beyond the wired glass, the corridor was empty. Aaron Blake had still not appeared. No message had reached her. If the transmitter had failed completely, the Federal Bureau of Investigation might have only the operation plan and no proof of what happened at the stop. Worse, Barrett now knew someone was asking about evidence room records. He could destroy what remained before the hearing. Rachel watched Danielle carefully. "There is something you are not telling me." Danielle kept her eyes on the glass. "There are things I cannot tell you yet." "Then help me understand why you are willing to sit in here." Danielle thought of Marcus calling their mother from custody, promising he had followed every instruction. She thought of Tasha's daughter waiting for a lie called a work trip to end. She thought of 6 arrest reports arranged across a bedroom floor, each one polished enough to erase the person inside it. "Because if I leave before he testifies," Danielle said, "he never has to say the lie under oath." Rachel became still. The room seemed to shrink around that sentence. Outside, a cart rolled past, its wheels rattling over a seam in the floor. "You are waiting for him to commit perjury," she said. Danielle did not answer. She did not need to. That evening, Tasha slept with one hand beneath her cheek while Danielle sat against the wall. A thin line of amber light appeared under the cell door, softer than the fluorescent glare above. For a moment, she remembered sitting beside Marcus during a summer storm when they were children, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. He had always counted too fast. She had always corrected him. Now there was nothing to count but breaths. Slow in. Slow out. Just before midnight, footsteps stopped outside the cell. A guard slid a folded note through the food slot without a word. Danielle opened it beneath the harsh light. There were only 4 words, written in Rachel's hand. The backup camera survived. Morning arrived as a change in sound rather than light. Doors opened. Keys turned. Shoes crossed the corridor with greater purpose. Danielle was taken from the cell before breakfast and led into the courtroom wearing the same navy blouse she had worn during the arrest. Rachel Kim waited at the defense table with a closed folder in front of her. She did not mention the note. She only met Danielle's eyes and gave one careful nod. Sergeant Lucas Barrett was already on the witness stand. His uniform was perfect. His badge shone beneath the overhead lights. He answered the prosecutor with calm precision, describing Danielle as evasive, agitated, and unwilling to follow instructions. He claimed Officer Evan Doyle had discovered the weapon during a lawful search. Doyle sat behind the prosecution table, pale and motionless. "Did you personally observe the defendant resist?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," Barrett replied. "Did you personally confirm the evidence recovered from her vehicle?" "Yes." "And is your report accurate?" Barrett looked directly at Danielle. "Every word." The lie settled into the room. Danielle heard the faint scratch of a reporter's pen and the slow turning of an air vent above the jury box. Rachel rose. "Sergeant Barrett, was your body camera functioning that night?" "It experienced a temporary technical failure. For exactly 93 seconds. Equipment does not fail according to a schedule." A few people shifted in their seats. Rachel approached the evidence table. "And the firearm displayed here was found in Ms. Carter's trunk?" "That is correct." "You are certain?" Barrett's expression hardened. "I was there." Rachel looked toward Judge Margaret Hale. "Your Honor, the defense requests that the sealed envelope delivered to your chambers 21 days before the arrest be opened." The prosecutor stood quickly. "We have no notice of this material." "Neither did Sergeant Barrett," Rachel said. Judge Hale studied both attorneys, then motioned to her clerk. The courtroom became quiet as the clerk unlocked the cabinet and carried the envelope to the bench. Judge Hale broke the seal and unfolded a federal property registration document. Her eyes moved down the page once, then again. "This firearm was registered as part of a Federal Bureau of Investigation operation 3 weeks ago," she said. Barrett's face changed. "Not much. Just enough." Rachel turned toward him. "The serial number matches the weapon you claim you discovered by chance. How did a federally tracked firearm leave police evidence storage and appear in my client's trunk?" Barrett looked toward the prosecutor. "I cannot speak to federal paperwork." Then perhaps the video can. The rear courtroom doors opened. Special Agent Aaron Blake entered with 2 federal agents and a portable evidence case. He placed a small memory device on the clerk's desk. "Your Honor, this recording came from a backup camera concealed inside the vehicle's rearview mirror." The courtroom monitor flickered to life. Grainy gas station light filled the screen. Doyle searched the trunk and stepped back. His voice came through clearly. "Nothing." Then Barrett sent him to the patrol car, opened Danielle's rear door, and moved toward the trunk. Every motion was visible. Every second had survived. Barrett stared at the screen as though the room had tilted beneath him. The prosecutor lowered his eyes. Judge Hale did not move. "Sergeant," Rachel said, "would you like to correct your testimony?" Before Barrett could answer, Doyle stood. His chair scraped sharply across the floor. "I would," he said. Every face turned toward him. Doyle walked to the center aisle holding a thick envelope against his chest. "I gave the Federal Bureau of Investigation copies of our unit logs, evidence transfers, and arrest records. Sergeant Barrett told me what to write that night. He told me no one would believe Miss Carter." Blake accepted the envelope. Barrett's badge still reflected the courtroom lights, but it no longer looked like authority. It looked like evidence. For several seconds, no one in the courtroom spoke. Officer Evan Doyle stood in the center aisle with his shoulders lowered, as if the weight he had carried for months had finally become visible. Sergeant Lucas Barrett remained on the witness stand, but the certainty in his posture was gone. Judge Margaret Hale looked from the federal registration document to the frozen image on the monitor, where Barrett's hand rested near the open trunk of Danielle's car. "Agent Blake," she said, "how extensive is this investigation?" Aaron Blake opened the evidence case and removed 3 sealed folders. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation has identified 32 arrests connected to Sergeant Barrett's unit that show the same pattern. Interrupted body camera footage. Evidence entered without complete property records. Repeated language in reports. Defendants pressured into rapid plea agreements." A low murmur moved through the gallery. Judge Hale raised one hand, and the room fell silent again. Blake continued. "We also recovered altered access logs from the police evidence facility. The handgun placed in Ms. Carter's vehicle was removed 6 hours before her traffic stop. The authorization code belonged to Sergeant Barrett." Barrett leaned toward the microphone. "Anyone could have used that code." Doyle looked at him for the first time. "You gave it to me," he said quietly. "Then you told me to erase the handwritten entry." Barrett's attorney rose from the front row and requested an immediate recess. Judge Hale refused. Her voice was controlled, but something beneath it had changed. This was no longer a routine hearing. It was an accounting. Rachel Kim placed Marcus Carter's arrest report beside the other files. "Agent Blake, was Marcus Carter one of the cases under review?" Danielle's breath tightened. Blake nodded. "Yes." The courtroom seemed to recede from her. The lights, the benches, the reporters, all of it became distant except for Marcus's stopwatch against her wrist. Blake explained that Marcus had discovered inconsistencies in the evidence used against another man. He had threatened to report Barrett's unit after recognizing property from the police storage room inside an arrest photograph. Hours later, his custody record was altered. The official report claimed he had been released at 7:18 in the evening, but garage footage showed him still inside a police vehicle 25 minutes later. Was Sergeant Barrett responsible for Marcus Carter's death? Rachel asked. Blake chose his words carefully. The investigation is ongoing. What we can prove today is that Sergeant Barrett concealed the final period of Mr. Carter's detention, directed officers to submit false reports, and pressured a witness to change her statement. Danielle closed her eyes for one breath. She had imagined this moment as anger, perhaps even relief. Instead, she felt the quiet ache of hearing her brother return to the world as a person whose truth finally mattered. Judge Hale removed her glasses and looked down at the cases spread before her. Her signature appeared on warrants, search orders, and plea approvals tied to Barrett's unit. "How many of these defendants appeared in my courtroom?" she asked. Blake answered softly. 21. The judge's face remained still, but her hand tightened around the glasses. Then this court helped give credibility to evidence that may have been fabricated. No one replied. She turned toward Danielle. "Ms. Carter, why did you not disclose your role in the federal operation when you were arrested?" Danielle rose slowly. "Because Sergeant Barrett needed to believe I was someone no one would defend. If I had shown him who was behind me, he would have hidden what he did to people who had no one behind them." The words did not rise. They did not need to. Judge Hale dismissed every charge against Danielle, ordered Barrett taken into federal custody, and directed the clerk to preserve all records connected to his unit. She also ordered an independent review of every conviction that had relied on his testimony. As federal agents approached, Barrett looked at Danielle with disbelief rather than apology. "You planned this," he said. Danielle met his eyes. "I documented it." His badge was removed and placed on the evidence table beside the handgun. The two objects lay beneath the same white light, stripped of the stories he had used to protect them. Across the courtroom, Rachel opened the side door. Tasha Reed stood there with her daughter's photograph pressed against her chest. Behind her waited families whose names Danielle had seen only in case files. Danielle did not celebrate. She walked toward them and asked Blake for one thing before she left the room. Start with every person who accepted a plea because they were afraid no one would believe them. 6 months later, the courtroom looked different, though the walls had not changed. The same high windows admitted the same pale morning light. The same wooden benches carried the marks of years of waiting. What had changed was the direction of the silence. It no longer pressed down on the accused. It waited for the truth. Danielle sat in the last row beside her mother, Miriam, while the clerk read the names of people whose cases had been reopened. Tasha Reed was the seventh. When the judge vacated her conviction, Tasha covered her mouth with both hands. Her daughter, Ava, ran to her before the bailiff could finish opening the side gate. No one told them to be quiet. One by one, old plea agreements were set aside. Evidence was re-examined. Records thought to be lost were recovered from Officer Evan Doyle's private files. Some cases took weeks. Others would take years. Not every wrong could be repaired with one order, and not every stolen season could be returned. Still, the doors had opened. 23 convictions had already been overturned. 9 more remained under review. The evidence clerk who altered the logs had agreed to testify. 2 prosecutors had resigned. The city created an independent office to examine misconduct claims, and body camera failures now required outside review. Lucas Barrett awaited federal trial on charges involving false evidence, perjury, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. His medals had been removed from police headquarters. The blank spaces on the wall remained visible. Danielle thought that was right. Some absences should not be covered too quickly. Aaron Blake sat near the front with a stack of files at his feet. Rachel Kim moved between families, explaining each ruling in a voice that was patient even when the news was complicated. Evan Doyle entered quietly and took a seat alone. He had resigned from the department. His testimony had exposed the unit, but it had not erased the reports he once signed. When his eyes met Danielle's, he gave a small nod. She returned it. Forgiveness, she had learned, was not the same as forgetting. It was not permission to escape responsibility. Sometimes it was simply the decision to leave room for a person to become better than the worst thing fear had made them do. After the final case was called, Judge Hale asked Danielle to approach. The courtroom waited, expecting a speech. Danielle carried Marcus's watch in her palm. A repair shop had offered to replace the damaged mechanism, but she had refused. The hand still rested at 8:12, marking the hour when the official story of her brother's final night had stopped making sense. Judge Hale looked at the watch, then at Danielle. "The court owes your family an apology," she said. "So does the city." Danielle's voice remained soft. "An apology matters when it changes what happens to the next person." Judge Hale nodded. "Then we will make sure it does." Outside, the courthouse steps were warm beneath the afternoon sun. Reporters waited behind a line of cameras, but Danielle walked past them. Miriam stood near the sidewalk holding a small framed photograph of Marcus in his basketball coach's shirt. Tasha and Ava joined them. Other families followed, not as a crowd demanding to be seen, but as people who had finally stopped being invisible. Miriam placed the photograph in Danielle's hands. He would be proud of you, she said. Danielle looked at Marcus's familiar smile. He should be here. Yes, Miriam answered. Nothing softened those words. Nothing needed to. Danielle fastened the stopwatch around her wrist and watched Ava draw a bright sun with sidewalk chalk near the courthouse steps. The child's yellow circle touched the edge of a crack in the concrete, then crossed it. Cars moved through the intersection. A warm wind lifted the corners of the reopened case files Aaron carried toward his vehicle. Justice had arrived late, and it had not arrived perfectly. But it had arrived because one woman refused to let silence be mistaken for weakness. Danielle had not defeated power by becoming crueler than the people who misused it. She had answered deception with truth, isolation with courage, and humiliation with dignity. As she walked away beside her mother, the hands of Marcus's watch remained still, but all around them, lives had begun moving again. And if you had known that speaking up might cost you your freedom before it saved someone else's, would you have found the courage to do what Danielle did?